But there's been discussion for a long time now about, first, about the legitimacy of foundations. So should we have them? Secondly, about what the rules of the game ought to be for philanthropic foundations. As to the first one, the first foundations came online in the very early 20th century. Carnegie Corporation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Russell Sage Foundation. And there was lively debate at that point, and there was real fear that philanthropic foundations, they were a brand new institution, posed a threat to democracy because the philanthropists would be likely to buy public policy. Ironically, that now seems to have come to pass, but it took 100 years. And there were congressional hearings in 1915, the Walsh Commission hearings, which a number of people got up and said, these institutions are a threat to democracy. We should not permit them to exist. Now, interesting, by the way, my wife's grandfather was one of those people who was the minister of he was a socialist, pacifist minister of the New York Unitarian Church, and he got up and said that what Mr. Rockefeller was doing was a threat to democracy. Go, Grandpa. But that led to, sporadic hearings in the Congress, but no real attempt by the Congress to limit foundations except in one respect, and that was to limit their direct participation in politics. So as early as the 1930s, 1934, we get legislation which limits the capacity of foundations to lobby. So you can't support specific pieces of legislation, and you can't support specific candidates for office. It was thought that that was all that was necessary. That was the intervention in politics that was threatening to democracy. The next real wave of reforms didn't come until the late 1960s, 1969. Those were mainly reforms aimed, though, at preventing foundations from violating the spirit of the game by using foundations to benefit the donors. And that was happening in smaller foundations. It was called the problem of self-dealing. They passed rules which really have been, I think, quite effective in preventing that from happening. But in this country, we've always been reluctant to do what almost every other country has done, which is to specify the parameters of charity. What is it that qualifies as charity? In England, for instance, the operative statute is still a 16:1 statute, the Elizabethan Statute of Charities, which sets out 13 different categories of charitable activity. It's been expanded somewhat, but basically it's a piece of legislation which tells the individual what he or she can do that counts as charity. We don't do that in this country. We've been unwilling to do that. We want donors to choose. We don't want to tie their hands. The only effective way we tie them is to say that if the foundation is a perpetuity, and as the funds keep rolling over, that there have to be at least 5% of the return each year has to be given away, has to be donated, or a tax, an excise tax, has to be paid on it. And that does encourage people to give away at least 5%, but not more than that necessarily. So one of the potential reforms has been to raise that to 6%. People don't even suggest higher than 6%. It's possible, though, for instance, to set up a philanthropic foundation that is tied to a number of years, for 10 years or 25 years, and there are some foundations that are time limited. And some fairly large foundations, most recently the Atlantic Philanthropies, which is a multi-billion-dollar fund, decided to spend itself down over a period of 25 years. So that's a possibility, but that's still the minority, and it's an unusual thing. But we have simply been unwilling either to set up effective supervision of any kind in the Internal Revenue Service or in the state attorneys general, who are the state officials who have jurisdiction over philanthropic foundation. In effect, what we have said to rich people is, so long as you keep doing good as you define it, and you spend at least 5% of your income a year, we're not getting in the way of your doing good. We have such confidence in you. Now, I leave it to you whether you think that's good public policy or not. But it's also public policy that's more or less adopted in the fit of absence of mind. The Congress never sat down and said, what would an ideal charitable system be? It just grew up. So it puts us in a very strange position. It is, by the way, why there is more charity in the United States than in any other country. Mm-hmm. And to give you some notion, by the way, when Leona Helmsley was the widow of a wealthy real estate tycoon, Harry Helmsley, and so she inherited several $1 billion. And when she died, she left a foundation, the principal purpose of which was to support her dog. Now, it wasn't only to support her dog, but the trustees could have used it that way. They have, in fact, been wiser than that, and while they are supporting her dog, I don't know if that dog is alive anymore, but they did. They're now doing other things. But it would have been perfectly legitimate. Or she could have left it for the breeding and encouragement of schnauzers. There would have been nothing illegal about that. And, query, is that a sensible decision? But you see, we have always dealt with these organizations through tax policy. And it's not necessary to deal with them that way. In fact, the Internal Revenue Service doesn't really have the capacity to make judgments about the value of philanthropic investments. It's a bad agency from that point of view. And this is an area, by the way, which I think is almost entirely unknown to the general public. There isn't any major newspaper or television channel, so far as I know, that today has a philanthropy beat. The New York Times had a philanthropy reporter for a few years. She still works for the paper, but that's no longer her beat, Stephanie Strom. And no other newspaper, though LA Times had one for a while. So it's not something we dignify with press coverage.